BBOR Black Box Online Radio, coming to you from West Virginia. BlackBoxNid88 on Instagram for the bonus podcast. And welcome to BBOR, the home of true crime talk radio and your premier destination for unsolved mysteries, criminal psychology, and exploring the dark side of cyberspace. My name is Ned DeHaan, and I am your host, as well as the creator of AstroPsych 400 here on YouTube, and regular contributor to the Zodiac Killer channel. And a great way to support these shows is just by listening to some more content. But you can also go over to Amazon.com and have a look at the book Killer on a White Horse, written by me, Ned DeHaan. It is a novel, murder mystery, inspired by the Zodiac Manson connection, but it is indeed fictional. However, who doesn't love a good mystery? And there is always the TeeSpring page. Feel free to check out some of the merchandise. And remember, being weird is not a crime. Let the show begin. Okay, hello everybody. Today is Friday, another Anything Goes Friday. Welcome to the show. How's everybody doing? I had said earlier in the week that I was planning on doing a true crime Q&A session with you guys, and welcome to the episode. But first, just a couple of quick announcements and reminders before we begin. Last week on the channel for the Anything Goes Friday segment, I did an episode on the Jack the Ripper suspect, Charles Lechmere, and I'm going to be continuing that discussion on Wednesday. I did part 1 last week. There'll be a part 2 coming out on Wednesday, but it'll be under the name Charles Cross. That's the Jack the Ripper suspect. It's the same guy. It's just an alias that he used. And Wednesday is now going to be devoted to a regular segment about the Ripper case. And of course, every Monday is Zodiac Monday, talking about the Zodiac Killer. And on the weekends, I've been doing a regular segment about the murder of JonBenet Ramsey from 1996. What I had said earlier was that I know that this might not be the most popular discussion in the world. However, you guys were leaving so many excellent comments and questions, or just things that not only I wanted to respond to, but also some thought-provoking things in the comments section, as well as the Facebook page and the email address, BlackBoxOnlineRadio@AOL.com, that I wanted to respond to the questions directly. So here, I would like to begin with one that comes to us from Chris Todd, and I was talking about his Zodiac Killer material on last week's Zodiac Monday, but he is the author of the book Ron's Revenge about the O.J. Simpson case. In 1994, Ron Goldman and Nicole Brown Simpson were murdered, killed by knife, and it's a case that needs no introduction because it became the focus of the trial of the century. And O.J. Simpson, the former NFL player, running back for the Buffalo Bills and the San Francisco 49ers, went on trial, and he, of course, was found not guilty. O.J. would later go on to be found liable in the civil court, but of course he was most famously not convicted in the criminal court. O.J. then went to jail years later for some other things, such as robbery and a variant of a kidnapping charge. I don't even want to say too many details about that, because I don't want to misstate something. However, with the O.J. Simpson case, there are so many people who think the jury got it right, and there are so many people who think that the jury got it wrong, and it spawned something that has been called the O.J. Truther movement. And again, I was corresponding with Chris Dodd, who has a book out about it. It's called Ron's Revenge, named after Ronald Goldman, one of the victims. And I've talked about the O.J. Truther movement before on the channel. I would like to respond to that material first, the title question, and then I'll get to some of Chris Todd's material. Firstly, was O.J. Simpson innocent? I have always taken the stance that O.J. Simpson was guilty. However, there are some people, like the true crime writer William C. Deere, who proposed, yes, indeed, O.J. Simpson was guilty. However, it should be called O.J. is guilty but not of murder, and that's what he went on to title his book, because William Deere believed that O.J. Simpson's oldest son, Jason Simpson, was actually responsible for the crimes. And I was listening to a sports show once, actually. I think it was called Arcand or something like that. And their calling out the O.J. Truther movement because, O.J. Simpson was a former athlete, football player. And they're saying, well, how on earth could anybody say that O.J. Simpson didn't commit those murders? There was blood evidence found in his car, the white Bronco. There was a knit cap that was found at the crime scene. Fibers from that knit cap were found on the floor mats in O.J. Simpson's white Bronco, partnered with the fact that he tried to flee, or he went on that very famous car chase in the white Bronco once again, all suggesting that he was guilty and had committed the crime, or the whole concept of he went to Nicole Brown Simpson's residence, his ex-wife, got into an altercation with her friend Ronald Goldman showed up, he got into a physical encounter with both of them, and they ended up being murdered by knife. Not to mention the fact that O.J. Simpson gave a variant of a confession in what has been known as the Judith Regan interview, when he was talking about a book called If I Did It, which was not a true crime book. It was a novel that was written by somebody named Pablo Finieves. And then it's almost like ghost written, or it was presented as a hypothetical. And in the Judith Regan interview, O.J. Simpson is talking about the book, but he calls it the hypothetical, about what could have happened if he had committed the crime, and saying that he showed up at Nicole Brown Simpson's house and Ronald Goldman was there, and then he exchanged some words, oh, you think you can kick my ass? And then they got into a fight, and that O.J. had a knife, and he outweighed Ronald Goldman by 50 pounds, so he was able to overpower him, and he murdered both of them. But William C. Deere proposed something, somewhat of an alternative theory, and that was that O.J. Simpson's oldest son, Jason Simpson, was actually responsible for the crimes, because all of these things, like the fibers from the knit cap ending up in the floor mats of the car, well, that's because it was his son's cap. Well, the blood evidence ending up in his car, well, that's because he was at the crime scene tampering with the evidence, but he didn't actually commit the murders. So there would have been explanations provided for anything, for absolutely anything and everything in the case, because O.J. was actually present there. But William C. Deere's theory was that Jason Simpson was the person who issued the fatal stab wounds to both Nicole Brown Simpson and Ronald Goldman, and even going to the point where he had a motive for that he worked in a restaurant as a chef. I'm just going off of memory now, but I think it was called Jackson's Restaurant, or Jackson's. Don't quote me on that, though. And Nicole Brown Simpson was supposed to come to his restaurant, his former stepmother, to try his food, and he even had a table reserved, set up placings for 11 people, but she didn't show up. And this is, of course, true, because Nicole Brown Simpson was at La Mezzaluna that night, the restaurant where Ronald Goldman worked. So Jason Simpson could have gone to the Bundy residence where Nicole Brown Simpson lived to confront her, just to have a discussion, hey, why didn't you show up at the restaurant that night? And Ronald Goldman showed up, and the altercation kicked off, and it was actually Jason Simpson who committed the stabbing. This is also partnered with William Deere's belief that Jason Simpson forged his time card on the night of the stabbing, that every other entry was printed. That was the only night that was handwritten in. Not to mention the fact that there was an unaccounted for boot print that was found at the crime scene, or boot print or shoe print, not O.J. Simpson's Bruno Mali shoe, and I mean the famous ones. So that also goes to show that, well, I mean, there could have been more than one person present at the crime scene, or as William Deere said, that Jason Simpson committed the crime, then he called his father because he couldn't really talk to anybody else if he committed a double murder. Just that's what instinct would be. Call Dad because Daddy will know what to do. And William C. Deere's theory was rather compelling. And I remember the first time that I watched his documentary, O.J. is Guilty but Not of Murder, I was so curious about it. I definitely didn't endorse that particular theory, but I thought that it was rather brilliant about how he presented the narrative, and he made it just sound so convincing that O.J. Simpson couldn't have committed this crime, and there were so many more reasons to think that Jason Simpson, his oldest son, was actually responsible for the murders. But, however, and there was a 6-part documentary series that was produced by Martin Sheen, actually, and I just call it the Martin Sheen series, that wanted to examine William C. Deer's theory that could Jason Simpson have been the perpetrator in the O.J. Simpson case. And the final episode of that gave an absolutely devastating takedown of someone's true crime theory. You can actually see somebody crash and burn on television, and you feel sorry for William C. Deer. But at the same time, it's true crime. It's about getting the truth. Point number 1, Jason Simpson did not actually forge his time card on the night of the murder. William C. Deer got the date wrong because he thought that it was a weekly time card, and it was actually a bi-weekly time card, and he took the rest of the week off after his stepmother had been murdered. That's why it was all on one page, and that was the source of the confusion. And also, just the reconstructions showed that it would have been much more indicative of somebody committing the murders and then entering the white Bronco partnered with that blood evidence, as opposed to the blood evidence of somebody like Jason Simpson, and then O.J. Simpson simply coming by for the staging. But more or less, they showed that William C. Deer was under several misapprehensions, and even one that they didn't talk about, or if they did, I don't recall this exact one, but I'm pretty sure they didn't talk about, that I openly called out William C. Deer for on this channel, and that is that he started out by saying that Jason Simpson was a chef, right? I said he worked in the restaurant, and he always left with his chef knives, so he could have been carrying a chef's knife when he confronted Nicole Brown Simpson for not showing up at the restaurant. But William C. Deer later went on to change the theory and saying that it wasn't a chef's knife that was used in the murder, it was a double-sided knife that was sharp on both edges like a dagger, and it had a type of rounded base at the hilt or on the handle, and it was a completely different type of knife. However, I thought that was purely inconsistent with what he had claimed before, and just, I'm sure medical examiners would be able to understand the difference or be able to document the difference. So, again, that's just some fictitious connection building that was done by William C. Deer. But if anything, I think that he's a very good storyteller. And I haven't read this book yet, but I've always had it on my list. I've wanted to read his book, The Dungeon Master. And it's about the disappearance of a teenage genius. And they're just, I won't even share too many of those details right now, but I've just been very curious about that one. But William C. Deer's book, once again, was O.J. is guilty but not of murder, and then it was repackaged into O.J. is innocent and I can prove it. And I think he was putting in somewhat of a strong effort to try and get attention, but I've talked to other people about their true crime theories, and when people have created a lot of findings, I ask them frequently when they're corresponding with me, hey, are you going to publish a book? And they're like, no, I'm not really into it for that. I don't really want to make money off this. I have made some observations about a true crime case, mostly the Zodiac Killer mystery, and I want to share these types of findings with, well, the world. And it was William C. Deer in the documentary version of O.J. is guilty but not of murder who said this line that I talk about all the time. The reason why he wrote his book was he just didn't know how to get anyone else to listen to him. He didn't know how to reach anybody else because he thought he made these observations and findings, and he wanted to share them, and that was just one of the only outlets to do so. So I talk to people about that all the time. Even if you're not in it for the money, I mean, you can always write an electronic version of your book and just give it away online for free via PDF format. I mean, you don't necessarily have to even charge money if you just have findings that you would like to share. But I would like to segue into a different subject. That is the spectrum of the O.J. truther movement, because it's not only this one theory that, oh no, O.J. didn't commit the murders, his son Jason Simpson did. I think the Jason Simpson theory has mostly been debunked, and they also talked about how there most likely was not another footprint found at the crime scene. It was an impression created from Ron Goldman's shirt pressing against the ground. Also, one of the pieces of evidence was that Ron Goldman had marks on his knuckles from striking a person in combat, yet O.J. Simpson did not have any superficial lacerations on his face or chest, but the alternative is that he could have done that by either striking the ground or the tree or flailing about and cutting up his hands in a different way. But some people think that O.J. Simpson was innocent, that he was completely framed for this by the detective Mark Furman as well as Philip Van Adder, and by O.J. Simpson's own admission that he had composure in the courtroom when they said not guilty because he wasn't looking at Van Adder. If he had been looking at Van Adder, he would have lost it. And also, to the credit of Stephen Singular, who has been a very public presence about the O.J. Truth movement, O.J. Simpson had actually met the detective Mark Furman once before in the 1980s, and Mark Furman was actually very familiar with Nicole Brown Simpson, even to the point where he made comments about her getting breast augmentation, said he liked her boob job, so he had reason to be involved with the tampering of evidence and the framing of O.J. Simpson. But a lot of that is guesswork at best, I think most people would admit. And Stephen Singular really went down in my book when he made the statement that O.J. Simpson was photographed wearing a pair of Bruno Magli shoes. It's spelled Magli. Some people say Bruno Magli. Even O.J. says Bruno Magli. But the YouTube and radio commentator Lionel says, this is not Bruno Magli. This is Bruno Magli Studente. And I don't know what studente means because I don't speak Italian, but I'm guessing that's something like I'm a student or I studied or something like that. But yes, Bruno Magli shoes. And it had a very particular type of tread, and that tread was matched to a footprint that was found at the crime scene, identical to O.J. Simpson's Bruno Magli shoe print. O.J. was seen photographed in one of the pairs of Bruno Magli shoes, so for all intents and purposes, they were his. And Stephen Singular said, well, they were photoshopped, but the picture ran in a newspaper. And even going back to my college days, I was once told from a very unlikable professor, but maybe he was hitting the nail on the head with something, that when photos are published in a newspaper or a widely circulated newspaper, they go through the process of engraving, meaning that the photo gets verified, and is this an authentic image, or has it been photoshopped or tampered or altered in some way? And the ultimate conclusion is, I absolutely don't think that there were any photoshopped photos of O.J. Simpson wearing Bruno Magli shoes. I instead think that, no, he was at the crime scene wearing his Bruno Magli shoes. And people are like, well, why would you wear your expensive dress shoes if you're going out to commit a murder by knife, knowing that blood would get everywhere? For the very simple reason that most likely he didn't go there with the intention to murder anyone, that there was some type of dispute or argument, and the situation boiled over. It went out of control. And it wasn't a cold, methodical, and calculated crime, but rather a crime that was done in the heat of the moment. And I would like to go back to O.J.'s confession, because a big element of the O.J. Truther movement is very simple, and that is that there was an accomplice, just that there were two people who were present at the crime scene, not one. And this person is most likely referred to as Charlie. When O.J. Simpson did the Judith Regan interview, which was called Did O.J. Confess?, he said very clearly that Charlie was a friend, and Charlie came to talk to him and said that something's going down at Nicole Brown Simpson's house, so they drove over there. And Charlie is actually the person who's holding the knife, and that the reason why O.J. Simpson carried a knife was it was easier to transport and across state lines, and you didn't need to get any type of firearms like background checks or anything. It was done. He carried the knife for protection. It's just there was less red tape involved than carrying a gun. And then O.J. Simpson blacked out, and he didn't even remember committing all of the stabbings, but Charlie was the person holding the knife. And after the Judith Regan interview, they did a Q&A session, and they're saying, well, who is this Charlie person that he's talking about? And strangely, they said, I think he's Charlie. And a lot of the other podcasts at the time took that and ran with it, and they're saying, oh, well, Charlie is his dark side. And it's just like Christoph Kozlov in the movie Dark Crime saying that, oh, a murderer has created a fictitious persona to take the blame for the crime so they don't feel guilt. Well, not quite. I think that in the context, and it's not simply that I think that people who are actually paying attention were saying, in the context that was provided, Charlie would actually be the moral compass because he's the one holding the knife and trying to get OJ not to commit the crimes. But I'm going to take a very strong stance with this. And this is the stuff that I wrote out to Chris Todd, author of Ron's Revenge. Back in 2019, I talked a lot about O.J. Simpson. Number one, I believe O.J. Simpson is guilty of the murders. Number two, I believe O.J. Simpson had an accomplice, an overlooked suspect. Number three, O.J. Simpson talks about a guy named Charlie. I believe that Charlie was a real person, not like how Judith Regan and others said that Charlie was a side of his personality. And the evidence to support this is in the Martin Sheen documentary, they interviewed one witness who took a lie detector test and passed, stating that she saw two people leaving the scene, or two people driving in a car fleeing the scene after the Brown Simpson Goldman murders. And she passed, and I put a lot more stock in lie detectors than most people, definitely more than most people in the comments section. And the second point is that O.J. Simpson isn't talking about Charlie as a side of his personality, like it's not his dark side or his moral compass. He's saying very clearly that this is a person who has approached him and told him to go to Nicole Brown Simpson's house because something was going down. And there might be parts of that story that aren't true, but Charlie is presented very clearly as a real person, and that just to me suggests that Charlie was not a side of his personality, and other people created that in their own minds. Now, was something actually going down at Nicole Brown Simpson's house? I don't believe so. I believe she was in the bathtub earlier that night, and she had also gone to La Mezzaluna, the restaurant where Ron Goldman worked, and even left her glasses there. I mean, that's what Ron Goldman is doing. He is returning to Nicole Brown Simpson's house to bring her the pair of glasses that she left behind. And this was the birth of an enormous amount of rumors that Nicole Brown Simpson and Ron Goldman were boyfriend and girlfriend, that they were romantically involved. And, I mean, the family of Ron Goldman said very clearly, no, they were not. They were actually just friends. People just can't comprehend about how these two people were just friends or they're on a friendly basis. But once you learn more about Ronald Goldman, he just seems like a very friendly, charitable, nice person. Rest in peace to both of them. But that he would also do things like hairdressing and styling for people who had cerebral palsy, like adding mousse to their hair and such. Not exactly like a makeover or something, but for hairstyling for people with disabilities, and he seemed like a very decent person. And he's just returning her glasses, and then the fight kicked off with O.J. Simpson, and by O.J.'s own admission in the Judith Regan interview, he's sort of staring down Ron Goldman, and Ron Goldman was a black belt in karate, and they're saying, like, how was he so easily overpowered by O.J. Simpson? Well, O.J. Simpson outweighed him by 50 pounds, and he had a knife. And this is another element of the spectrum of the O.J. Truther movement, and that is that the Brown Simpson Goldman murders were not actually committed by O.J. or Charlie or Jason Simpson. They were actually committed by the serial killer Glenn Rogers, who was known as the Casanova Killer, a real serial killer who murdered by knife and was in Nicole Brown Simpson's inner circle. And this theory is discussed in the movie The Murder of Nicole Brown Simpson, where Mena Suvari plays Nicole Brown Simpson. I haven't watched it yet. I was looking forward to it, but for some reason they decided not to air that in small town theaters in West Virginia, but that is definitely going to the top of my list, and it talks all about Charlie being a code name, O.J. Simpson and Glenn Rogers being in cahoots, and there is just this theory going on. I'm getting that info purely from watching the trailer. But some of the final points that I will share with you about the O.J. Truther movement is, number one, the blood evidence that was found at O.J. Simpson's that was used in the trial, the blood evidence that was supposedly suggesting that O.J. Simpson was guilty, allegedly came from a cut on O.J. Simpson's hand. O.J. Simpson says that he cut his hand on a glass in a hotel room in Chicago after he learned about the murders. And I'll say something about that in a second, but number one, they had witnesses at the trial. One of them stated very clearly that he sat next to O.J. Simpson on the plane, and they asked him, "Did you look at his hands?" And he said, "Yes, I was looking at his hands because he's O.J. Simpson, and I wanted to see if he was wearing a championship ring, and he did not observe any cut." The second point is O.J. Simpson signed autographs for people on white paper, and he did not leave any blood evidence behind. He did not leave any cuts behind, or people did not witness the cut on his hand, not leave cuts behind. He did not have any witness state that he had blood on his hand. And then the final point is that this is one that I completely agree with, mind you, that just because you cut yourself on a glass in a hotel room and the glass falls and breaks, it does not mean that there's going to be an enormous amount of blood left behind. If it's a very clean cut, sometimes the blood doesn't come immediately. I mean, have you ever cut your hand or your fingertip in some way? I mean, I definitely did that all the time as a kid, and I just would stare and look at it. Oh, it feels like I've been cut. And now you just look and look, and you wait for it. You wait for like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then it starts bleeding. I mean, even cutting myself shaving, sometimes that happens. Sometimes the blood doesn't come out immediately. So I don't think that is a good point at all, that they didn't find blood evidence in the sink or the hotel room in some type of dripping or pouring manner. I mean, okay, but I really have no comment on the autographs or the person examining his hands for championship rings. So that is mostly where I will leave it, because I've taken a very clear stance. I mean, I think the evidence suggests that there was multiple participants, not even multiple killers, but someone who's acting like a getaway driver, somebody who, perhaps even by OJ's own admission, was holding the knife and then OJ takes it from him. And I'm partnered with the fact that the Charlie story has been incorporated. But I would definitely like to read the book, which I'm now in possession of, Ron's Revenge by Chris Todd, and I'm looking forward to hear all of his observations, because as I understand, we're mostly going to be in agreement that OJ had an accomplice and that this Charlie person was a real individual, not just a side of his personality. But what do you think about any of the things that I've shared in this episode here? And now I would like to go to some material in a totally different direction. And I did an episode recently called The Sandy Hook Shooting, talking about how 10 years have passed since the Sandy Hook shooting in 2022. I mean, meaning that the shooting occurred in 2012. Last year was the 10th year since that shooting took place, and the Sandy Hook shooting was committed by the perpetrator Adam Lanza. And there's some comments that came in, and the first is, funny that his direct violence against a place where no one might carry a weapon to return fire and drop his ass, pardon me to say, was the plan. And that was from D-Trap By. So I think that goes to show you that somebody like Adam Lanza was most likely deranged, mentally ill, not in any level-headed state of thinking, but also that he had the awareness of what he was doing. And there's a difference between not guilty by mental disease and defect and not being fit to stand trial. I mean, some people genuinely have psychotic episodes, like people who are schizophrenics, where they just have no awareness of what they're doing. And then there are other people who have awareness of what they're doing, but they're still just not fit to stand trial. And an example of this would be Robert Louis Deere, no relation to William C. Deere, to the best of my knowledge, where he was the Planned Parenthood shooter back in 2015, and they had this video of him where he's just in the courtroom shouting, "They're selling baby parts! They're selling baby parts! They gave me the lawyer for the Batman killer!" And I'm not really trying to be silly, that's just how he talked. And his attorney even said, I think his behavior today demonstrates that he's not fit to stand trial. And I completely agree with that. However, he was able to say very clearly why he committed the shooting, the reason why he committed the shooting. Yes, he is deranged, but he still had the awareness of what he was doing. But with someone like Adam Lanza, the Sandy Hook shooter, it comes across as a little bit more cowardly, and that is because he had the awareness of what he was doing, and he had the physical and mental abilities to go to the school with a loaded firearm and to shoot people, to gun down innocent lives. And I think this comment hits the nail on the head when it's saying he committed a very vicious crime because people wouldn't be able to fight back, and then committed suicide so he would never be prosecuted. Very cowardly indeed. The next comment comes to us from Gilligan's Inc., who says, why would Adam Lanza destroy all his equipment? What was he hiding, and why would he hide it? Most mass killers want to be remembered and praised, like the one in 2017. Maybe he's referring to Stephen Paddock. I'm not buying any of this BS because there's obviously something bigger going on. Well, not exactly. I don't quite agree with that because sometimes murderers do want to hide certain things. And I was having a conversation with somebody recently about Ted Bundy, and he was talking about how Ted Bundy, although he wasn't a mass shooter, he's a serial killer, Ted Bundy was saying that, he committed the crimes, but even after he's been convicted, he just didn't want people knowing that he was also a necrophile and that necrophiliac and that he had sex with the bodies after the murders. And even though he isn't really ashamed of what he's done, he doesn't want people to know that exact issue. And Ted Bundy stuck by his innocence for a long time, but eventually he came around. And I think that there are certain aspects of the true crime world where we see that some criminals are okay sharing some things, and other things they do not want shared. And also, the thinking of a madman can be hard to unravel, and perhaps there were certain aspects of Adam Lanza's equipment or his computer hard drive that he did not want people in the general public to know about, or maybe he just did it in an act of destruction. I mean, I completely comprehend the nature of the question where you're saying, well, why would he destroy something like a computer hard drive if he was going to die anyway? I mean, he's dead. And if he's committing a mass shooting, why would he care how people remember him if he's just trying to unleash destruction on humanity? Perhaps it's just something about power tripping even more. Destroying the hard drive allows him to take these secrets to the grave with him. I mean, that's just guessing at my point. Now you guys are gonna really have to forgive my language for this next comment, which is also written by Gilligan's Inc., a two-part one. The fact that you explained that the killer had no school pictures, just blanks, and nobody knew who he was or had any information, not even his family, but some way you want us to believe it definitely wasn't staged. Yes, that's what it says. LOLOL, this channel is retarded. And yes, RETARTED. I don't like using that word, but no, he even spelled that particular unflattering word to people with mental disabilities incorrectly. And also, Gilligan's Inc., maybe you'd like to take a grammar course or something. But firstly, I can't believe that somebody in 2022 or 2023 is still standing by that nonsensical Alex Jones narrative that the shootings were staged or that these mass shootings were faked. And with Sandy Hook, it goes beyond that, even to the point where they're saying that, oh, they were crisis actors and the whole thing was just a facade. And I mean, the fact that you're still standing by that to this day based on everything that we know is pathetic. And you really believe that, and that you have the audacity to insult me for just saying, hey, the shooting happened, it was real. No, there aren't a lot of yearbook photos of Adam Lanza, but there definitely are images of Adam Lanza. So, who arranged this all? the New World Order, criminal elements of the military-industrial complex? I mean, like, are you still avoiding the fluoride in the water? Are you still taking super male vitality pills and drinking Alex Jones's Patriot coffee because he tells you to? I mean, you need some help, sir. But aside from that, it's just, we cannot believe everything that people like Alex Jones throw around, because sometimes they're just sorely mistaken. But with the Sandy Hook shooting, let's also zone in on the fact that Alex Jones lost. They sued him, and he lost. O.J. Simpson was sued, and he lost. That does count for something. With Alex Jones, I think they tried to make an example out of him, because I even had certain issues with the way that his depositions were conducted, and they were put on YouTube, and you could see a lawyer asking him questions. Okay, one day you said this about the Sandy Hook shooting, and then 3 months later you said something completely different about the Sandy Hook shooting, and these statements are in pure contradiction, and they're using that as evidence, stating that he intentionally spread false information about the Sandy Hook shooting. But, I mean, 3 months, that could have easily been human error and incompetence and mistakes on his part, or misinterpretations on his part. And yes, of course, I think Alex Jones was lying. I'm just saying, in a court of law, that's just something that shouldn't be discounted. So, but I mean, I did want to respond to that just because I thought that those comments were rather ridiculous. Now, moving on to a subject that I talked about recently on the Anything Goes Friday segment, and that was the murder of Alexander Litvinenko. And he was the former Russian spy who was allegedly murdered by the Kremlin, by possibly even orchestrated by Vladimir Putin himself, although the person that most likely committed the murder was named Andrei Lugovoy. And my episode is called Polonium 210, The Murder of Alexander Litvinenko. And Alexander Litvinenko is also thought to have been the first person to have been murdered by polonium poisoning in recent times. We have a comment from Jeff Jones that says, well, you can't buy polonium at Walmart. That should be a pretty good clue as to who is responsible. And you can't buy it at Asda either in the United Kingdom. And that was one of the few times on Black Box Online Radio that I was talking about a true crime case that had a very strong amount of substance. I mean, I'll say something about that in a second, but firstly, they're actually looking at how Vladimir Putin may have orchestrated a crime against somebody who went public and revealed criminal plots that the Russians were committing. Like, specifically, Alexander Litvinenko said that he had refused to kill a particular billionaire or be involved with the assassination plot of a particular billionaire, and he went public, and he ended up writing a book called Blowing Up Russia, co-authoring it, actually. And I think that actually goes to show you that sometimes conspiracy theories are most likely true. That stuff about Sandy Hook, absolute baloney. And the fact that someone's actually online defending it, saying, well, there aren't a lot of yearbook photos of him. Oh, yeah, therefore the whole shooting was staged, so that people can steal firearms from the general public by brainwashing Americans and trying to destroy modern culture. Yeah, that's just called dopamine surges flaring in the brain. But aside from that, I think that sometimes conspiracy theories are true. Two or more people hiding the truth, usually for a malicious reason. Say, for example, somebody like Alexander Litvinenko goes public with secrets of what the Russians were doing and how they were manipulating the power play worldwide, and he gets murdered by polonium poisoning, which no, you cannot buy at Walmart or Asda or at the shop down the street or even at Witherspoon's. So, yeah, Witherspoon's is a bar. However, I think that that is just one of the times when there was so much value in looking how our world leaders lie to us, politicians lie to us, and I see so many people who are just gung-ho for their favorite politicians, and I'm in the camp of thinking that they are all just power-hungry individuals. And I was talking about John Lorden recently on the most recent Phantom Killer episode that I did. I also talk about the Phantom Killer here on Black Box Online Radio, and you can like and subscribe. But he said once that just the fact that somebody wants to be a politician should give you reason not to trust them. The fact that this person is saying that they want to devote their life, their sole ambition is to give themselves more power, you shouldn't trust them. And I don't trust any of the politicians, and I am so far removed from the political sphere that I just want to leave it at that, except for the fact that I did one episode in 2019 talking about this, and I actually was responding to someone else's YouTube video, but they brought up 2 points, which I incorporated into a BBOR episode. That number one, the concept of government can actually be scary. The fact that certain people have more power than other people, and you would hope that there would be good actors in play, but the fact that sometimes people tell lies to get into office so they can manipulate the system for their own benefit. Even in instances when they're going to say, all right, I have power now. What am I going to do with my power? Well, I'm going to murder Alexander Litvinenko for talking about me in a way that I don't like, or revealing secrets that could be very detrimental to my regime. And yes, of course, I was thinking of Putin. However, the second point that was mentioned in that video is that people talk about the Illuminati and secret societies, and I said something briefly about the New World Order, but if there actually is an Illuminati in our present day, they're probably not calling themselves the Illuminati. Yeah, of course, there was a secret society in Bavaria in the 1800s called the Illuminati. But let's look at these conspiracy theorists. Let's look at what they're saying. Let's look at this flowery and flamboyant language that Alex Jones would talk about, the globalists, the tyrants, and the social engineers. Like, what is he saying? It's called corruption. It's called people manipulating the power process to benefit the few, which leads to the concept of oligarchy. And that's why I've said countless times on this channel that the New World Order is very real. It's the mechanism that allows oligarchy to propagate power for the few, concentrations of wealth and concentrations of power for the few, not for the many. And if you want to talk about the Illuminati, what I used to say in the recent years was that the Illuminati would be the people who have the knowledge of how this power mechanism is operating. They have knowledge of how the New World Order is operating, how about how the oligarchs are obtaining power, and maybe somebody like Alexander Litvinenko goes public and he gets murdered. And I mean, there is even a little bit of speculation and guesswork on my part by using these terms, but I think that these are very real. And as the former CIA operative John Stockwell said very clearly, read for yourselves. I mean, you can listen to John Stockwell's presentations on YouTube, especially the one that he did called The Praetorian Guard, the book that he did where he assembled his lectures um, well, just that, a book. They're like from his speeches and presentations. And he also did another book called In Search of Enemies, which was a little bit more famous. And that's the one that people often refer to him thinking about the CIA and so on. But he said, read for yourselves. Also read Deadly Deceit by Ralph McGehee. Also read Noam Chomsky's Manufacturing Consent when it talks about just how the concept of democracy and the electorate are manipulated. People get their political views from the media, and if the media just presents a certain image, then they're causing hundreds of millions of people to think in a certain way. When you go across international boundaries, it's into the billions of people, and they're thinking in a certain way. And I mean, if they just present a certain side of a politician, then people are going to think that about the particular politician. Therefore, the concept of democracy can be manipulated by the media, manufacturing consent. And I know that this isn't a name that a lot of people would want to hear, but Webster Tarpley did a very fascinating lecture once called The Venetian Conspiracy, and he is not someone that is well regarded by everyone. I find him to be incredibly entertaining, though, and he said that if you control how people think, you control everything. And for centuries, people have zoned in on this concept. And even going back to the 1700s, when you had the oligarchs of Venice having these types of salons that they called them, where they had intellectuals sitting around and devising plans about how the elite and the power circles could obtain more power. And an example of this would be Giovanni Maria Ortiz, who was part of one of these salons, and he came up with the carrying capacity about limiting population growth and so on, as well as trying to quantify human beings by reducing human beings to just numbers, as well as saying that the human body is just flesh, bone, ligament, and tendon. By just treating human beings as objects and numbers, then the global elites would benefit more. And there's a very similar practice that was put forward by Frederick Winslow Taylor in the 20th century called the Principles of Scientific Management. And this was employed by Henry Ford in the construction and the establishment and the production of the assembly line. Again, just treating human beings, the workers, as objects where they need to do a job to keep the constant revolving door of production in play. But this means that you have to do things that are detrimental to not only human life, but also human well-being. Well, then somebody gets their arm cut up in the machinery. Oh, well, they still have another arm. They can work with one hand now. Just put a towel around it. And that happens all the time. And there's so many examples of this. And this is why labor activists were trying to put an end to those things. And nowadays we have some better ways of keeping an eye on these things. We have things like workman's comp. But I think you can get the idea that by reducing the human being to just a number or calling them an object, they're just workers or being treated as objects, then the people who actually have the concentrations of wealth and concentrations of power will benefit from this. And if that's a conspiracy theory, then I'm a conspiracy theorist. And if that is something that is evil, then I'm going to be on the side of good, because they're just trying to destroy humanity for profit and to use humanity in their own destruction, because they do not have the ability to achieve a higher sense of social and economic and political well-being, political meaning in relation to the power process. So a lot of these issues are very present in the whole point of why would the Kremlin want to murder Alexander Litvinenko? Well, he threatened Vladimir Putin's ability to manipulate that power process, not destroyed it. Oh no, absolutely not. If anything, Litvinenko was the person who was destroyed. However, he definitely was a threat, and the threat was neutralized. And some of the other examples of this that get brought up in the world of conspiracy theories are when there is a particular political leader who goes against what the majority of other political leaders want and is just trying to do things to benefit the people, or trying to do things that benefit the people in a way that does not benefit the other members of the oligarchy, that person can be murdered, assassinated, taken out, disposed in a CIA-backed coup, and there are all types of ways in which this power process can be manipulated. I could talk to you for 3 hours about it. We haven't even talked about the aspects of colonization and post-colonial syndrome in places like Africa. I mean, I could do 5 hours on that, not 3, but I think that's where we're going to have to leave it at for now. So this started off by answering the question, was O.J. Simpson innocent? No. That's an easy win, and then it's gone off in several other directions, talking about Sandy Hook and the murder of Alexander Litvinenko. And the final note is, even though this is not the most popular subject on the channel, I would love to read the book, The Litvinenko File. Maybe do a book discussion on that. But first, I'm going to be reading some things about the Zodiac Killer and discussing them with you guys. And then I will be reading the book Ron's Revenge by Chris Todd, available on Amazon.com. That's all for me now, so I will see you guys over on Instagram for the bonus podcast. But if you'd like to keep in touch, you can always write me at BlackBoxOnlineRadio at AOL.com. And there is Blackbox Online Radio on Facebook. My personal Facebook is also in the description box. And now, I will see you over on Instagram for the bonus podcast. Until next time.